Jake, a driven young man whose heart is set on building a life with Emily, the woman he loves. He works tirelessly, investing every ounce of energy and hope into creating a future for them. But Emily's vision of happiness is different. She wants wealth and luxury now, and Jake's dreams feel too far away. When she leaves him for a wealthy new boyfriend, Jake is left heartbroken but determined, diving headfirst into his work to prove himself. Years later, their paths cross again in the most unexpected way. Jake is now a successful CEO, engaged to a woman who believes in him unconditionally. But Emily's life has taken a turn she never saw coming. She's struggling and, to survive, ends up working at Jake's company, under him. Can past regrets be healed? Will forgiveness open doors to a new future? Or is this simply closure, a final goodbye for two people who once meant everything to each other? Watch till the end to see how choices, forgiveness, and true resilience shape their lives. If you're ready for a story that touches on life's most profound lessons, hit subscribe and join us for more. Let us know your thoughts and what you would do in their situation in the comments below. Now, let's dive into today's story. The sky was darkening as Jake adjusted the bag in his hands, turning it over to make sure everything was perfect. He'd spent weeks saving up for this gift, working late hours and skipping outings with friends just to afford it. Sure, it wasn't the Louis Vuitton bag Emily had hinted about, but it was a Kate Spade, a stylish, understated black bag with sleek gold accents. It was the best he could do for now, and he hoped it would be enough. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door to their small apartment, the familiar scent of coffee and fresh laundry greeting him. There, lounging on the couch, was Emily, scrolling through her phone, her dark hair spilling over her shoulder. She looked up when he entered, her expression mildly surprised. "Hey," she greeted him, her voice soft but slightly distracted. "You're home early." Jake's face broke into a smile, feeling his heart race with excitement. "Thought I'd surprise you." Her eyes flicked to the bag he held, curiosity briefly flashing across her face. She sat up, setting her phone aside, and waited for him to hand it over. He couldn't help but grin as he passed it to her. "I know you've been talking about a new bag for a while, so here it is." Emily accepted the gift, her fingers delicately untying the ribbon. Jake watched her, eagerly awaiting her reaction. She opened the box and lifted the bag, her fingers running over the smooth leather. For a brief moment, a smile flickered across her lips, but then her face changed. "Kate Spade," she said, her tone holding a hint of disappointment. Jake's smile faltered. "I know it's not exactly what you hinted at, but I thought it was beautiful. And hey, once things take off with my business, I promise I'll get you the Louis Vuitton you want." Emily forced a small smile, setting the bag on the coffee table. "It's sweet, Jake. Really. It's just that, all my friends at work have designer bags. Chanel Louis. They'd notice if I showed up with something else." The words stung, and Jake felt the excitement he'd held on to drain away. "Emily, I'm doing everything I can. Once the business is stable, things will be different. But for now," she held up her hand, stopping him. "I get it. I do. I know you're trying. But it's just hard sometimes, He took a slow breath, pushing down the frustration rising within him. "I'm working late every night. I'll put everything I have into this. You know that, right?" She looked away, picking up her phone again. "Yeah, I know." After a heavy pause, she glanced at him with a small sigh. "So, are we still going out tonight?" "Of course," he replied, although a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. "I was thinking we could try that diner on Fifth. Just something simple." Her face fell. "The diner? Jake, I thought we were going to that new steakhouse downtown. I was looking forward to something nicer." He hesitated, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "I know, Emily, but I spent a lot on the bag, and I thought maybe tonight could be more about us. Now where we go?" She gave him a long look, disappointment clear on her face. "Sure, whatever you want, Jake." The following days were tense. Emily's disappointment hung between them like an unspoken shadow, clouding their conversations and turning ordinary moments into silent battles. Jake tried to brush it off, telling himself that she would understand soon, that she just needed a little more time. One evening, They were driving back from a friend's gathering, where Emily's friends had shown off their new cars, clothes, and extravagant vacation plans. As they passed by the glowing city lights, Emily glanced out the window and pointed to a sleek BMW parked by the sidewalk. "See, that's the kind of car people our age should be driving," she said, her tone wistful. Jake's grip on the wheel tightened. "Emily, you know I'm putting everything into the business. The last thing I can afford right now is a new car." She sighed, turning her gaze back to him, her expression weary. I don't understand why it's taking so long, Jake. It's like you're content living in this someday fantasy while I'm here waiting." Frustration bubbled up within him, but he forced himself to keep his voice steady. "Emily, building something from the ground up takes time. I'm not trying to live in some fantasy. I'm working toward a future for both of us." Her voice softened, but her words hit hard. "Jake, maybe you're fine waiting around, but I'm not sure I am anymore." He clenched his jaw, stifling the hurt her words brought. "So what are you saying, Emily?" She didn't respond, instead turning to stare out the window, leaving Jake alone with his frustration. A few days later, Jake tried to make things right. He planned a simple anniversary dinner at a cozy bistro they'd once loved, hoping it would remind them of their early days together. He carefully picked a spot near the window where they could overlook the twinkling lights of the city, hoping to rekindle the warmth they'd once shared. But the moment Emily walked in, he could see that her expectations had not been met. She looked around, her expression barely hiding her disappointment. "This is quaint," she commented, glancing at the simple decor. "It's where we celebrated our first anniversary," Jake replied, forcing a smile. He thought she'd appreciate the sentiment. Emily picked up the menu, scanning it briefly before setting it back down with a sigh. "I was hoping for something a bit more upscale. My coworkers keep talking about that new place downtown, and I thought maybe—" Jake's shoulders slumped. "Emily, I'm trying my best here. I wanted tonight to be special for us. Can't that be enough?" She bit her lip, looking away. "It's fine, Jake. Let's just order." The night went by in painful silence, with Emily barely touching her food. Jake could feel his heart growing heavier with each minute that passed, realizing how far apart they'd grown. Despite the tension, Jake refused to give up. He scraped together what savings he had left and bought a modest engagement ring, hoping that his commitment would show her how much she meant to him. One quiet evening, after they'd shared a simple dinner at home, he took a deep breath and dropped to one knee, holding up the ring. Emily's eyes widened, but instead of the joy he'd hoped for, her expression was one of surprise and hesitation. "Jake," she began, looking down at the small diamond, her voice strained. "This ring, it's well small. I mean, it's sweet, but—" Jake's heart sank as he watched her grapple with her words. "Emily, I know it's not the biggest ring, but it's a promise. I'm building a future for us, and this is only the beginning." She sighed, setting the ring down. "Jake, I don't think I can keep pretending that this is enough for me. I want a life that feels real now, not someday." The words cut deep, and Jake felt his dream of a future with her slipping away. He watched as she gathered her things, her final words echoing in his mind. Emily moved out a week later. Jake came home one evening to find her side of the closet empty, the space as hollow as his heart. On the kitchen counter lay a note. "Jake, I need a future that's stable and real, and I just don't see that here. I'll always care for you. Please don't hate me." He sank into a chair, feeling the weight of her absence crush him. His friends tried to console him, but he barely heard them, his mind lost in memories of the life they'd once dreamed of. Alone, he looked down at the engagement ring he'd bought, feeling its cold weight in his hand. In that hollow silence, a decision took root. If Emily couldn't believe in him, he would have to believe in himself. His business would become his focus, his path forward, and he'd make it succeed no matter what. The emptiness of his apartment gnawed at Jake. Without Emily, the space felt too large, too hollow, and too quiet. Nights stretched on endlessly, and though he tried distracting himself with work, the ache of loneliness crept in like an unwelcome guest. But amidst that void, something stronger began to take root, a determination to push forward, to make something of himself, not just for her, but for himself. Each morning, Jake arrived at CloudTrack's shared office space before sunrise, diving headlong into work. His best friend and business partner, Ethan, noticed the shift in Jake's focus. At first, he hesitated to bring up Emily, sensing that Jake was trying to bury that pain beneath a relentless drive. "So, what's the latest on that deal with the agency?" Jake asked one morning, as if his intensity were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan watched him, slightly worried but supportive. "We're getting closer. They seem interested, but they're waiting on final numbers." "Good," Jake replied, his jaw set. "Let's push for it. We need this." In the weeks that followed, Jake and Ethan poured everything into their startup. CloudTrack's project management software, a streamlined tool to help small businesses organize and communicate, was finally gaining traction. As word spread, a few smaller clients signed on, and Jake could feel his initial vision slowly taking shape. He worked late into the nights, driven by a need to prove, to himself and to anyone who doubted him, that he could succeed. With each new client, Jake felt himself grow stronger, his confidence in his work deepening. He knew he'd face more setbacks and long hours, but he was determined to create something real. What had once been a dream shared with Emily was now his own vision, a future built on his own resilience. Months passed, and Jake's hard work finally paid off in a big way. After several rounds of negotiations, he and Ethan signed a contract with Pierce Marketing, a mid-size agency looking to streamline their internal operations. The deal was significant, marking the first major client that CloudTrack had landed, and it brought in enough revenue to stabilize their operations for the coming year. Ethan leaned back in his chair, grinning at Jake. "Can you believe it? We actually did it." Jake returned the grin, a wave of pride washing over him. "This is just the beginning, man. We're on our way." To celebrate, they gathered a few friends and went to a local bar, toasting to their first major success. It was during this small celebration that Jake met Sophie, one of Ethan's close friends who'd come along to show her support. Sophie was warm and genuine, her laughter easy, her smile sincere. They talked for hours, and Jake was struck by how different she was from anyone he'd ever known. Sophie worked as a community organizer, dedicating her time to helping underserved families access resources and support. She was passionate, down-to-earth, and curious about the world in a way that felt refreshing to him. "So, tell me about CloudTrack," Sophie said, leaning forward, genuinely interested. Jake found himself smiling. "Well, it started as an idea to help small businesses get organized. We were tired of seeing these entrepreneurs struggle with chaotic workflows and wanted to give them a tool that made things simpler." "That's incredible," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "It must feel amazing knowing you're building something that can actually make people's lives easier." Her words warmed him, stirring something inside that he hadn't felt in a long time. Sophie didn't care about his financial success or his status. She seemed drawn to his passion, his dedication. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers, and Jake left with a feeling of excitement he hadn't known since long before his breakup with Emily. In the weeks that followed, Jake and Sophie spent more and more time together. Their connection grew naturally, with no pretenses or expectations. She brought him coffee when he worked late, occasionally dropped by with homemade cookies, and texted him encouragement when he needed it most. Their conversations were easy, filled with laughter and genuine curiosity. One evening, they walked through a park, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Sophie talked animatedly about her latest community project, and Jake listened, feeling a deep admiration for her dedication. "You know, Jake, I think what you're building with CloudTrack is really special," Sophie said, her voice warm. "It takes a lot of courage to put everything you have into something you believe in." Jake felt a lump in his throat as he looked at her, her words striking a chord. "Thank you, Sophie. I don't think I've ever met anyone who believes in me like that." Sophie's hand found his, her grip gentle yet reassuring. "Well, I do, and I know you're going to go far." For the first time since Emily's departure, Jake felt whole. Sophie didn't ask for grand promises or material gestures. She valued him for who he was, and that made all the difference. While Jake's life was blooming, Emily's was beginning to unravel. Her new boyfriend, Chris, was everything she'd thought she wanted: successful, charismatic, and financially stable. But as the months passed, she began to see the cracks in their relationship. Chris was often distant, more interested in work than spending time with her. When they attended events, he would leave her to mingle with other people, his attention always drifting. Sometimes, she'd catch him flirting with other women, his gaze lingering on them in a way that made her feel like an afterthought. One evening, as they were leaving a dinner party, Emily mustered the courage to bring up her concerns. "Chris, do you ever feel disconnected? Like we're not really in this together?" He laughed, his tone dismissive. You're overthinking things. Just enjoy what we have, all right?" But Emily didn't feel connected. She felt like a prop in his life, a convenience rather than a partner. Memories of Jake's kindness crept in, filling her with a longing she tried to ignore. She had chosen this life, believing it was what she deserved. But now, surrounded by luxury, she felt emptier than ever. Back at Cloud Track, Jake and Ethan were gaining momentum. They had landed several more clients, and with the income rolling in, they expanded their team and moved into a larger office. Jake was thriving, his confidence growing with each new achievement. Sophie was by his side through it all, her unwavering support a source of strength. She celebrated his milestones with him, whether they were major deals or small wins. Unlike Emily, Sophie never pressured him to be anything other than himself. One evening, after a successful presentation to potential investors, Sophie surprised Jake by waiting outside his office with a homemade dinner. They sat together on the floor, eating and laughing in the warm glow of the city lights. "Look at you," Sophie teased, nudging him. "CEO and all." Jake chuckled, grateful to have her there. "Couldn't have done it without you, you know." Sophie raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Maybe, but I think you would have found your way regardless. You're determined, Jake, and you deserve every bit of success that comes your way." Her words filled him with warmth, grounding him in the knowledge that he was building a life that was his own, a life of purpose, resilience, and hope. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of discontent that had taken root. Her relationship with Chris was beginning to feel like a trap, and his indifference had left her feeling isolated. When she discovered she was pregnant, a mixture of fear and hope filled her. She told Chris, expecting him to be supportive. Instead, he responded with cold detachment. "Emily, I'm not cut out for the whole family thing. I'm not interested in playing house." Stunned, Emily watched as he walked out of the room, leaving her alone to grapple with her feelings. She felt a rising wave of regret as she thought of Jake. She'd given up his kindness and devotion for a life that now felt hollow. One night, after another argument with Chris, she found herself scrolling through Jake's social media. Her heart twisted as she saw a photo of him and Sophie, both smiling, a caption that read, "Celebrating new beginnings with someone who believes in me." A pang of regret struck her, deeper than anything she'd felt before. She realized she'd given up something real for an illusion, and now, her past choices weighed heavily on her. CloudTrack reached new heights when Jake and Ethan signed a contract with Harris Tech, a major industry player. This deal solidified CloudTrack's reputation, and they celebrated with a party at the office. Amid the laughter and toasts, Jake felt a surge of pride. For the first time, he could see a clear future, one that he'd built with his own hands. Meanwhile, Emily's life was unraveling. Chris ended their relationship abruptly, leaving her to face her pregnancy alone. She felt lost, abandoned, and painfully aware of how far she'd fallen. Desperate, she reached out to old friends and family, only to find that most had moved on. Her support network evaporated. The realization left her with an overwhelming sense of loss. Her journey had led her to this place, and now, alone and uncertain, she began to wonder if there was any way to rebuild. After Chris walked out, Emily faced the stark reality of her choices. With no financial support, little work experience, and her pregnancy beginning to show, she felt her options closing in. She spent hours scrolling through job listings, submitting applications, and facing rejection after rejection. The roles she'd previously considered beneath her were now the only ones available, but the lack of a degree and relevant experience shut most doors. One afternoon, as she walked through the bustling downtown streets, she overheard two women chatting outside a cafe. CloudTrack is hiring, one of them said. I heard it's a good company, and they treat their employees well. CloudTrack. The name tugged at her memory. Jake's startup. She felt a pang of regret, but pushed it aside. She needed a job. Any job. And the thought of working for Jake, even indirectly, didn't seem as impossible as it once would have. The next morning, she arrived at CloudTrack's headquarters, a sleek, modern building that seemed worlds apart from the life she'd been living. She approached the front desk, nerves prickling as she asked for the HR department. A kind receptionist directed her to Linda, the HR manager, who scanned Emily's sparse resume with a critical eye. We currently have an opening for a cleaner, Linda said after a pause, her voice steady but not unkind. It requires hard work and long hours, and you'll need to start immediately. Emily nodded, swallowing her pride. I'll take it. I'm ready to start whenever you need me. Linda studied her for a moment, sensing her desperation, but nodded. Then you start tomorrow. As Emily left the building, she felt a mixture of dread and relief. She would now be working for the company she once doubted, in a role she'd never imagined. Yet there was a glimmer of hope in her chest. She was determined to make this work. Not for anyone else, but for herself and the child she was carrying. The following day, Emily arrived early, dressed in a plain uniform that felt like a symbol of her new life. She moved through the building, pushing her cart from office to office, scrubbing desks, emptying trash cans, and polishing windows. Each room was filled with a vibrant energy that she couldn't ignore. Teams working late, young employees chatting by coffee machines, people absorbed in their work. CloudTrack was thriving. At the end of her shift, she reached the executive floor, where she saw a familiar nameplate on the last door, CEO Jake Adams. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at his office door. Steeling herself, she pushed her cart down the hall and quietly entered. Inside, she moved quickly, working around the polished furniture and sweeping views of the city below. Then, her eyes landed on a framed photo on Jake's desk. A photo of him with a smiling woman, her hand resting on his arm. Sophie. They looked happy, truly happy, and a pang of regret twisted in Emily's chest as she realized what she had given up. Suddenly, she heard the door open behind her. Turning, she found herself face to face with Jake, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. Emily, he asked, his voice calm yet surprised. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she struggled to find the right words. I didn't know you were the CEO here. I needed work, and she trailed off, her gaze dropping. Jake's surprise softened into something unreadable, his gaze steady as he took in the sight of her. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. I see. Well, welcome to CloudTrack. Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Jake. And I'm sorry for everything. He watched her for a moment, then nodded again. It's in the past, Emily. We're both in different places now. She gave him a small, grateful smile before hurrying out of the room, her heart pounding. As she continued her shift, the weight of her mistakes settled over her, but for the first time, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had faced him, faced her past, and though it hurt, it also felt like the start of something new. Later that evening, Jake recounted the encounter to Sophie, who listened with quiet understanding. They were sitting on his couch, Sophie curled up beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. So, what are you going to do? She asked softly, sensing the conflict in his voice. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, I don't know. I've moved on, but seeing her like that, it brought up a lot. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then looked up at him. You have a big heart, Jake, and sometimes forgiveness can be the most freeing thing we can give, not just for others, but for ourselves. He took in her words, a realization dawning on him. The hurt he'd held onto for so long no longer felt like his burden to carry. You really think I should help her? Sophie smiled, her eyes warm. If anyone could, it's you. The next day, Jake called Emily into his office. She entered nervously, avoiding his gaze, afraid he might be letting her go. I'm not firing you, Emily, he began, and her shoulders sagged in relief. But I don't think cleaning is the best role for you, given your condition. Emily blinked, taken aback. I don't mind. I'll do whatever I have to. He held up a hand, stopping her. I'm offering you a position as a secretary. It's less physically demanding, and it'll give you a stable environment. Her eyes widened, and she fought back tears. Thank you, Jake. I don't know how to thank you enough. He gave her a nod, his tone steady. This wasn't just my decision. Sophie encouraged me to help. Emily swallowed, realizing the depth of their kindness. Please thank her for me. Just then, Sophie appeared in the doorway, a soft smile on her face. Emily's gratitude spilled over, and she whispered, Thank you, Sophie. Truly. Sophie stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Just take care of yourself and your baby, Emily. That's all we want. Emily left the office with a new sense of hope, feeling a weight lifted from her heart. She had been given a second chance, and she was determined not to waste it. Months passed, and Jake and Sophie's relationship continued to blossom. They decided to marry in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Jake stood at the altar, watching Sophie walk down the aisle, her face glowing with happiness. Across town, Emily dressed in a simple yet elegant dress, intending to attend the ceremony as a gesture of closure and respect. She placed a hand on her growing belly, taking a steadying breath. But just as she was about to leave, a sharp pain seized her, and she doubled over, gasping. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, heard her cry and rushed over. Emily, sweetheart, I think it's time. You're in labor. With Mrs. Thompson's help, Emily made it to the hospital, where the hours stretched on in a blur of pain and anticipation. As she lay in the delivery room, her mind drifted to Jake's wedding, imagining him and Sophie exchanging vows, a bittersweet pang filling her heart. At last, as the sun began to set, Emily's newborn daughter entered the world. Tears streamed down Emily's face as the nurse gently placed the baby in her arms, her heart swelling with love and awe. Welcome to the world, Lily, she whispered, kissing her daughter's tiny forehead. I promise I'll be here for you, no matter what. The day after their wedding, Jake and Sophie received word of Emily's labor. They arrived at the hospital with a bouquet of fresh flowers, quietly entering her room. Emily, exhausted but overjoyed, looked up in surprise as they walked in. Congratulations on your beautiful daughter, Sophie said warmly, setting the flowers on her nightstand. Jake's eyes softened as he looked down at the baby in Emily's arms. She's precious, Emily. I'm happy for you. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she thanked them, overwhelmed by their kindness. Thank you both. I don't deserve this. Sophie stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've come a long way, Emily. Take care of yourself, and remember, you're not alone. As they left, Emily felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the past had been put to rest. Watching them walk away, hand in hand, she was finally ready to let go. A year passed, and both Jake and Emily had settled into their new lives. CloudTrack had become one of the most respected young companies in the city, and Jake and Sophie were eagerly awaiting the birth of their first child. Meanwhile, Emily had found a part-time job at a community center, helping other single mothers. She spent her days with Lily, focusing on creating a loving, supportive environment for her daughter. One warm afternoon, while walking through the park, Emily saw a young couple laughing together, and she smiled, remembering the warmth and peace she had found through her own journey. Her past regrets had softened, replaced by hope and gratitude for the life she was building. As she watched her daughter play, she whispered a silent promise. I'll make sure you have the life you deserve, Lily, and I'll make the most of every moment. Emily held her phone close, her hand trembling slightly as she read through another rejection email. The subject line was just one in a series of letdowns. Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to move forward with another candidate. She sighed, clutching her belly instinctively, feeling the weight of her decisions more heavily with each passing day. As her pregnancy began to show, doors that were once open seemed to close more quickly than she could grasp. One afternoon, while weaving through the bustling streets of downtown, she overheard two women chatting outside a cafe. Their conversation drifted toward work and she caught the name Cloud Track. Her heart skipped. Jake's company. For a moment, she considered walking away. After everything that had happened, how could she walk into his world now, especially under these circumstances? But as her hand rested on her growing belly, a wave of resolve washed over her. She needed stability, not for herself, but for the life she was carrying. The next day, she walked into the sleek lobby of Cloud Track, her nerves prickling under the harsh fluorescent lights. Approaching the front desk, she introduced herself softly. The receptionist directed her to the HR office, where Linda, the HR manager, gave her resume a cursory glance. "We have an opening for a cleaner," Linda said after a pause. "The hours are demanding, and it requires a lot of physical work. Are you prepared for that?" Emily nodded quickly, swallowing her pride. "I'll take it. I can start as soon as you need." Linda watched her carefully, her expression softening slightly. "We can start you tomorrow morning." As she left the building, Emily felt a strange combination of relief and apprehension. Working at Jake's company was something she never could have imagined, yet it was exactly what she needed now. She took a deep breath, letting her decision sink in, determined to prove, to herself most of all, that she could change, grow, and survive. Emily's first day at Cloud Track was a humbling experience. She moved from floor to floor, sweeping, mopping, and tidying up after the employees who buzzed around, caught up in their work and conversations. To them, she was invisible, a shadow that swept through, tidying their spaces before quietly disappearing. But as she worked, Emily couldn't help but notice the vibrant energy that pulsed through the building. Teams laughed together by the coffee machine, people engaged in animated discussions, and a sense of purpose filled the air. Cloud Track wasn't just Jake's dream. It had become a reality, something tangible and thriving. And she was part of it now, even if only on the fringes. Toward the end of her shift, she reached the top floor. Her gaze fell upon the last door in the hallway, its nameplate glinting under the soft lights. CO Jake Adams. Her heart thudded as she realized she would have to clean his office. Steeling herself, she pushed the cart down the hall, hesitated, and finally stepped inside. The room was pristine, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. It was a space of accomplishment, a far cry from the life she now led. As she dusted the desk, her eyes caught on a photo frame sitting at its edge. It was a picture of Jake, smiling with a woman beside him, Sophie. Emily felt a pang of regret as she took in their happy faces, the easy way they held each other. She had once dreamed of being by his side, building a future together. Now, that future was someone else's reality. The sound of the door opening jolted her back to the present. She turned, her face flushing as she saw Jake standing there, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "Emily," he asked, his tone unreadable. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. I didn't know you were here. I needed the work and—" Jake's eyes softened slightly as he took in the sight of her, dressed in the plain uniform, clutching a cleaning rag. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice calm but distant. Emily swallowed hard. I'm sorry. For everything. I know that doesn't change anything, but I just needed to say it." He nodded slowly, his face softening even further. "It's okay, Emily. The past is the past." She gave him a small, grateful nod, then quickly gathered her supplies and left, her heart pounding. Though the encounter had been briefing, she felt a strange sense of peace, as if a weight had been lifted. She could finally face what she had once run from. That evening, Jake sat with Sophie on his apartment's balcony, recounting the encounter with Emily. The city lights twinkled around them, and Sophie listened intently, her hand resting on his. "I wasn't expecting to see her," he admitted. "And working here, it's just strange." Sophie squeezed his hand gently. "It must bring up a lot of emotions. But maybe it's a chance for you to find closure, too. You've both come so far." Jake looked down, his heart torn between past resentments and a newfound empathy. "I moved on a long time ago, but seeing her like that, it was hard. She's clearly struggling." Sophie gave him a soft smile. "Jake, Sometimes helping someone is the best way to let go of old hurt. The next day, Jake called Emily into his office. She entered cautiously, and he could see the nerves etched on her face, her hands twisting together as if bracing herself for bad news. "I'm not letting you go, Emily," he said, noting the relief that crossed her face. "But I don't think this role is suitable for you, especially considering your condition." Emily blinked, her voice wavering. I don't mind. I'll do whatever I have to." He nodded but continued. "I want to offer you a position as a secretary. It'll be less physically demanding and more manageable for you." Emily's eyes filled with gratitude, and she struggled to keep her composure. "Thank you, Jake. I don't know how to repay you for this kindness." He gave her a gentle nod. "It wasn't just me. Sophie encouraged me to do this." Just then, Sophie appeared in the doorway, offering Emily a kind smile. Emily's gratitude spilled over, and she whispered, "Thank you, Sophie. I mean it." Sophie stepped forward, resting a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "Just make the most of it, Emily. We all deserve a second chance." Emily left the office with a heart filled with hope. She had been given an opportunity to rebuild, and she was determined to make the most of it. In the months that followed, Jake and Sophie's love deepened. They planned a small wedding, intending to keep it intimate and genuine. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Jake stood at the altar, watching Sophie walk toward him, her face alight with joy. He felt a deep gratitude, knowing he had found someone who understood him, supported him, and accepted him as he was. Across town, Emily dressed in a simple, elegant dress, hoping to attend the ceremony as a gesture of closure and respect. But just as she was preparing to leave, a sharp pain shot through her, doubling her over. Mrs. Thompson, her elderly neighbor, noticed her distress and hurried over. "Emily, dear, I think it's time. You're in labor." With Mrs. Thompson's help, Emily made it to the hospital, where she faced the long hours of labor alone. As she lay in the delivery room, her thoughts drifted to Jake and Sophie, imagining their vows and the love that had grown between them. It was a bittersweet thought, but it brought a sense of peace. Finally, as the sun set, her daughter entered the world. Tears filled Emily's eyes as the nurse placed the baby in her arms, a surge of love flooding her heart. "Welcome to the world, Lily," she whispered. "I promise to be here for you always." The day after their wedding, Jake and Sophie learned of Emily's labor and decided to visit her at the hospital. They entered her room quietly, carrying a bouquet of flowers, and Emily looked up in surprise, her eyes welling with emotion. "Congratulations on your beautiful daughter," Sophie said warmly, placing the flowers beside her. Jake's eyes softened as he looked at the newborn in Emily's arms. "She's perfect, Emily. I'm happy for you." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as she thanked them, her heart full. "Thank you, both of you, for everything." Sophie placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've come a long way. Take care of yourself, and remember, you're not alone." Watching them walk out hand in hand, Emily felt a wave of closure, knowing that the past had truly been laid to rest. A year later, both Jake and Emily had found new lives of fulfillment. CloudTrack had grown into a respected company, and Jake and Sophie were expecting their first child. Emily, meanwhile, had embraced her role as a mother, finding purpose in raising her daughter, Lily, and working at a community center. One warm afternoon, she watched Lily toddle around the park, her laughter ringing out, and she felt a deep peace settle within her. The pain of the past had softened, replaced by gratitude for the lessons it had taught her. As she whispered a promise to give Lily a life filled with love and stability, Emily knew she had found her path, a life built on growth, resilience, and unconditional love. Emily sat at her kitchen table, her hands tracing small circles over her growing belly. The past few weeks had left her weary, filled with rejection letters and missed opportunities. She'd applied to almost every job she could find, from retail positions to food service, but her lack of experience and education, combined with her visible pregnancy, made each interview more daunting than the last. Each rejection echoed her past decisions, each one a reminder of what she had lost in pursuit of fleeting dreams. She closed her laptop with a sigh, her eyes drifting to a stack of bills that had begun to pile up. The situation was growing urgent, and fear was settling in like a weight on her chest. That's when she heard the conversation. The cafe just below her apartment always had a lively crowd, and the sounds of people chatting and laughing would float through her open window. That day, two women were discussing their jobs, one of them excitedly mentioning an opportunity at a growing tech company. CloudTrack, the woman said with enthusiasm. I hear they're hiring. It's supposed to be a great place to work. They treat their employees well. Emily froze, her heartbeat quickening. Jake's company. The name sparked memories, both painful and comforting. She hadn't thought about him in months, but here he was, indirectly offering her an unexpected glimmer of hope. She realized how much had changed. The version of herself she'd been then. Demanding, restless, convinced that success meant wealth and status. Felt like a stranger. Now her needs were simpler. She wanted stability, peace, a steady income that would allow her to provide for her child. After a restless night, Emily decided to swallow her pride. She put on the nicest outfit she had, a simple blue blouse and a pair of slacks that stretched uncomfortably over her belly, and walked through the busy downtown streets to CloudTrack's headquarters. The sleek glass building was intimidating, a reminder of how far Jake had come and how far she had fallen. Inside, she approached the front desk, her voice soft as she asked to speak with someone in human resources. The receptionist directed her to a small office where Linda, the HR manager, greeted her. Linda's kind yet professional demeanor eased Emily's nerves, though she couldn't ignore the lingering doubt in Linda's eyes as she reviewed Emily's resume. Thank you for coming in, Emily, Linda said, looking up from the sparse sheet of paper. I see you don't have a lot of work experience. Emily swallowed hard, nodding. I'm willing to do anything. I just need a chance. Linda's gaze softened, and after a moment she gave a nod. We currently have an opening for a cleaner. It's hard work, and it requires long hours. Are you sure you're up for it? Emily straightened, forcing herself to hold Linda's gaze. Yes, I'll do it. I can start immediately. Linda studied her, her eyes thoughtful. Then report here tomorrow morning. We'll get you set up with a uniform and the supplies you'll need. Relief flooded Emily's chest, but so did a strange sadness. Working at Jake's company in such a humble role was a reminder of her own choices, of the life she had once rejected. But she was no longer the woman she'd been back then. Now, she was someone who needed to build a life, not just for herself, but for the small life growing inside her. The next day, she arrived early, dressed in the plain uniform they'd provided her. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways of CloudTrack, the whispers of conversations, the sound of laughter, and the sense of purpose that filled the building were undeniable. This was Jake's world, a world he had built through hard work and sacrifice. She remembered how she had once dismissed his dreams, and guilt settled over her like a heavy shroud. Toward the end of her shift, Emily reached the top floor, her heart racing as she approached Jake's office. She knew she'd have to clean it, and the thought of stepping into his personal space was both daunting and humbling. She took a deep breath, her hand hesitating on the door handle, then entered quietly. Jake's office was pristine, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased a breathtaking view of the city. She noticed his desk, tidy and organized, with only a few personal touches. Her eyes landed on a framed photo, and she found herself drawn to it despite herself. It was a picture of Jake and a woman, Sophie. They looked so happy together, their smiles warm and genuine. Emily felt a pang of regret that reached deep into her heart, twisting painfully. Once, she had been in Sophie's place, imagining a future by Jake's side. But she had thrown it away, and now that life belonged to someone else. As she gently dusted the desk, the door opened behind her. She turned sharply, her face flushing as she saw Jake standing in the doorway. He looked surprised, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of her in a cleaner's uniform. "Emily," he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and confusion. Emily felt the color drain from her face, her mouth going dry. "Jake, I didn't know you were here. I didn't mean to." He took a step forward, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer, more understanding. "It's okay. I just wasn't expecting to see you." For a moment, They stood in silence, the weight of their past hanging heavily between them. Emily took a shaky breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. I'm sorry, Jake, for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that. Jake's face softened, and after a moment he nodded. Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. She nodded, her throat tight. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. To change. To be better. He regarded her quietly, as if weighing her words, then nodded again. I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily. With that, he gave her a small, understanding smile and left the room. As the door closed behind him, Emily felt a sense of closure. She had faced him, apologized, and while she knew it wouldn't change the past, it allowed her to move forward, carrying her mistakes as lessons rather than regrets. That evening, Jake found himself restless, the encounter with Emily replaying in his mind. As he sat with Sophie on their balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, he told her about what had happened. She's working here as a cleaner, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. I never expected to see her like that. Sophie, ever compassionate, listened thoughtfully, resting her hand on his. It must be hard for her, Jake. I can't imagine what she's going through. Jake let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. I've moved on, but seeing her like that, it brought back memories. She's clearly struggling, and I can't pretend I don't feel something. Sophie looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. Jake, sometimes the best way to heal is by offering someone else a chance to rebuild. Maybe helping her would help you too. The next day, Jake called Emily into his office. She entered hesitantly, her posture tense, her gaze dropping as she waited for him to speak. I'm not letting you go, Emily, he said gently, and she let out a small sigh of relief. But I don't think cleaning is the best role for you, especially with your pregnancy. Emily blinked in surprise, her voice soft. I don't mind. I'm willing to do anything. He nodded, his expression steady. I'd like to offer you a position as a secretary. It'll be less physically demanding, and it might give you a more stable routine. Emily's eyes widened, filling with gratitude as she struggled to keep her composure. Thank you, Jake. I don't know how to thank you for this. I promise. I won't let you down. This wasn't just my decision, he added, a small smile on his lips. Sophie encouraged me to help. Just then, Sophie appeared in the doorway, a gentle smile on her face. Emily's voice faltered as she looked at her. Thank you, Sophie, for giving me a chance. Sophie stepped forward, resting a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. Just take care of yourself and of your little one. We all make mistakes. The important thing is how we move forward. Emily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears as she whispered her thanks. She left the office with a heart full of gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. She had been given a second chance, and this time, she was determined to build something real. Jake paced nervously at the front of the chapel, his fingers adjusting the cufflinks on his suit jacket for the third time. He tried to keep his cool, but his heart raced with anticipation. Today was the day he would marry Sophie, the woman who had not only stood by him through his journey, but had also shown him the value of compassion, forgiveness, and steady support. The small chapel was decorated with white roses and eucalyptus branches, their subtle fragrance filling the air. The pews were packed with friends and family, all of whom had watched Jake and Sophie's relationship blossom over the past year. Jake's best man, Ethan, stood beside him, nudging him with a grin. You look nervous, man. Relax, Ethan whispered, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Jake chuckled, but the nerves remained. He glanced toward the double doors at the back of the chapel, willing himself to stay calm. When the soft strains of the wedding march began to play, his breath hitched, his eyes locked on the doors. As the doors opened, there she was, Sophie. She wore a simple white gown that flowed with elegance, and her hair was swept back, a few soft curls framing her radiant face. Her eyes shone with warmth and love as she made her way down the aisle, her gaze fixed on Jake's. In that moment, Jake felt a wave of emotion crash over him. He remembered the years of late nights working on his startup, the loneliness and heartbreak he'd endured, the struggle to prove himself. And now, here he was, standing beside the woman who had believed in him, who had seen him not just for his potential but for the person he already was. Sophie's father gently took her hand, passing it to Jake with a nod. Jake squeezed her hand, feeling an overwhelming gratitude. Together, they turned to face the officiant, the love between them almost tangible. "Friends and family," the officiant began, smiling warmly, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two souls who have come together in love, trust, and mutual respect. Jake and Sophie's journey has been one of growth, resilience, and hope, and today, they stand before us to pledge their lives to one another." As the ceremony continued, Jake found himself lost in Sophie's eyes, his heart full of promises and dreams. When it came time for the vows, he took her hands in his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Sophie," he began, his words thick with sincerity, "from the moment you came into my life, you reminded me of what it means to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved for who I am. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and you taught me that love is more than words. It's a commitment, a choice we make every day. Today, I choose you, and I promise to keep choosing you, through every high and low. I'm yours, now and forever." Sophie's eyes glistened as she held his gaze, her voice barely a whisper as she replied, "Jake, you are my home, my safe place, and my greatest joy. I am so proud of the man you are and the journey that brought us here. I vow to stand by you, to lift you up, and to be your partner in every sense of the word. I am yours, today and always." They exchanged rings, sealing their promises with trembling hands. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Jake leaned in, kissing Sophie with a tenderness that spoke of all the unspoken words, the quiet understandings, and the unwavering love they shared. The chapel erupted in applause, friends and family cheering as Jake and Sophie turned, hand in hand, ready to embark on the next chapter of their lives together. While Jake and Sophie exchanged vows, Emily stood in front of her small bedroom mirror, smoothing the simple dress she'd chosen for the wedding. She had decided to attend, hoping to see Jake's happiness firsthand and find closure in witnessing him build a life that was no longer intertwined with hers. She placed a gentle hand on her belly, taking a steadying breath. But just as she reached for her coat, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, taking her by surprise. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was passing by her door and heard her gasp. She knocked, concern filling her face as she entered. "Emily, sweetheart, are you all right?" Emily clutched the doorframe, her face pale with fear. I think I'm in labor." Mrs. Thompson quickly slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Come on, dear. We need to get you to the hospital." Within minutes, they were in a cab, the city lights blurring past as Emily focused on breathing through the contractions. She clenched Mrs. Thompson's hand, her mind racing with fear and anticipation. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on her. While Jake was marrying the woman he loved, she was about to welcome a child into the world alone. At the hospital, the hours dragged on in a haze of pain, doctors and nurses moving in and out of her room as the labor progressed. As the pain intensified, Emily's thoughts drifted back to her past with Jake. Memories flooded her mind, the nights they spent dreaming of a future, the promises they'd made, and the love she had let slip away. She felt a pang of regret, realizing that she'd once held something pure, something real. But she had allowed her ambitions and insecurities to push it away. Yet, as dawn broke and the cries of her newborn daughter filled the room, a new feeling took over. The nurse gently placed the baby in her arms, and Emily's heart swelled as she gazed down at her daughter's tiny face. "Welcome to the world, Lily," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. She traced her daughter's delicate features, feeling a fierce, protective love take root. "I promise you'll always have me. I won't let you go." In that moment, Emily felt a profound shift. She was no longer defined by the choices of her past. She was a mother now, responsible for a life she would protect and nurture. Her regrets no longer felt like weights. They were lessons, reminders of the love and kindness she would cultivate within herself and pass down to her daughter. The day after the wedding, Jake and Sophie were enjoying a quiet morning when a message came through from the hospital. They had been notified of Emily's labor and birth and wanted to visit, both to offer support and to see how she was doing. They arrived at the hospital that afternoon, still in the glow of their newlywed joy. Sophie carried a bouquet of delicate pink flowers, and Jake held a small card congratulating Emily on her new baby. When they entered her room, they saw Emily resting in bed, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. Emily looked up, surprise and gratitude flooding her expression as she saw them. "Jake, Sophie, I didn't expect to see you." Sophie stepped forward, placing the flowers beside Emily's bed. "We heard the good news and wanted to congratulate you." Jake's gaze softened as he looked at the baby, wrapped snugly in a soft pink blanket. "She's beautiful, Emily," he said, his voice gentle. "Congratulations." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked between them, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. "Thank you for everything. I don't deserve this kindness." Sophie placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, her voice warm. "Emily, we've all made choices, but that doesn't mean we're beyond grace or compassion. You're starting a new chapter, and we're here if you ever need support." Emily looked down at her daughter, feeling the depth of Sophie's words sink in. For the first time, she felt an undeniable sense of peace, as if the past was finally settling. "Thank you. Truly," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. As Jake and Sophie left, Emily watched them go, hand in hand, their bond evident in every shared look and touch. She felt a strange but welcome feeling of closure. She had been part of Jake's journey once, and though that chapter had ended, she was grateful to have been given a new beginning. A year passed, and both Jake and Emily had settled into lives of purpose and peace. CloudTrack had grown into a successful, respected company, and Jake and Sophie were happily married, their bond growing stronger with each new challenge and triumph. They were now eagerly awaiting the arrival of their first child, their future filled with dreams of family and shared memories. Emily, meanwhile, had found fulfillment in her role as a mother. She worked part-time at a community center, helping other single mothers find resources and support. Her days were spent guiding Lily through her first steps, her first words, and each small milestone that filled her with joy. One warm afternoon, Emily took Lily to the park, watching as her daughter toddled around, laughing at the sight of butterflies and flowers. As she watched her child, Emily felt a deep peace settle within her. She had once sought validation in all the wrong places, but now she understood that true fulfillment lay in love, in growth, and in the quiet moments of joy she shared with Lily. She whispered to her daughter, a promise she would keep forever. "You'll always have me, Lily. I'll make sure you have a life filled with love." As she watched Lily play, Emily knew she had finally found her purpose. She was no longer haunted by regrets, but inspired by the lessons she'd learned. Her journey had brought her here, to a life built on resilience, grace, and the simple, profound love of a mother for her child. 2 years after their wedding, Jake sat on the front porch of the modest, yet cozy home he and Sophie had purchased. The air was warm, the evening sky painted in hues of pink and purple, a perfect backdrop for the peaceful life they had built. From inside the house, he could hear Sophie humming as she moved about, her voice soft and comforting. Beside him, in his arms, he held their newborn son, Henry, swaddled in a blue blanket and sleeping soundly. Jake looked down at his son, a sense of overwhelming love filling him. All his years of striving, of heartbreak, of growth, had led him here. He was no longer driven by the desire to prove himself or chase validation. He was living a life that brought him genuine happiness and fulfillment, a life built on love and mutual respect. In Sophie, he had found his partner, his true equal, and with her by his side, he felt unstoppable, ready for whatever life might bring. Sophie stepped out onto the porch, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Jake and took a seat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched the sun dip below the horizon. "He's beautiful, isn't he?" she murmured, glancing at Henry. Jake nodded, his voice soft. "He really is. I still can't believe he's ours." They sat in silence for a while, savoring the quiet moments. Their journey had been filled with challenges, but those challenges had only strengthened their bond, and now they were a family. Together, they had built a foundation of trust and love that would carry them through whatever the future held. Across town, Emily stood in her small kitchen, smiling as she watched Lily play in the living room. At 2 years old, Lily was a bundle of energy, her laughter filling their home with joy. Emily often marveled at how much her daughter had taught her, not just about motherhood, but about resilience, patience, and the importance of embracing life's simple moments. Since Lily's birth, Emily had dedicated herself to creating a stable and loving environment for her daughter. She had continued working part-time at the community center, where she now led workshops for single mothers, offering them the support and resources she had once needed herself. Helping others had given Emily a sense of purpose and a new perspective on her own journey. One afternoon, as they were leaving the community center, Emily noticed Lily staring intently at a nearby family, a father, mother, and young boy playing together. For a brief moment, Emily felt a familiar pang of loneliness, but it was fleeting. She no longer compared her life to others. Instead, she felt grateful for the love she shared with her daughter and for the supportive community they had found together. After dinner that evening, she sat down with Lily on her lap, reading her a bedtime story. Lily's eyelids began to droop as Emily whispered the final lines of the story, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "I love you, Lily," she murmured, her heart swelling with emotion. More than anything in this world. As she watched her daughter drift off to sleep, Emily felt at peace. She knew she would continue facing challenges and that life would not always be easy, but she also knew she had the strength to persevere. Her mistakes and regrets had become part of her story, shaping her into a person she could be proud of, a person who could provide her daughter with a life filled with love, stability, and hope. Months later, Emily was on a rare outing with a friend from the community center, taking Lily to a bustling local park filled with families, laughter, and the scent of freshly cut grass. She had been helping Lily navigate the small jungle gym when she caught sight of a familiar face in the distance. It was Jake, pushing a stroller and smiling as he watched his young son toddle toward a slide. A wave of emotions rose in Emily's chest, a mixture of warmth, nostalgia, and an acceptance of what their lives had become. She felt no bitterness, only gratitude for what he had once been in her life and a sense of happiness that he, too, had found peace. For a moment, their eyes met across the playground. Jake gave her a nod and a small, understanding smile. She returned it, a silent acknowledgement of their shared past, a mutual respect for the paths they had taken. Sophie appeared at Jake's side, placing a hand on his arm, and Emily watched as the two shared a quiet laugh, their bond evident even from afar. Emily looked down at Lily, who was reaching up, asking for help climbing the steps of the jungle gym. She smiled, turning her attention fully to her daughter, and felt a deep sense of peace. As Jake and Sophie left the park that afternoon, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Seeing Emily with her daughter reminded him of how far they both had come. Their lives had moved in different directions, yet he felt that in some way, their journeys had helped shape who they were today. Sophie glanced at him, noticing his thoughtful expression. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Jake nodded, squeezing her hand. "I am. I think for the first time, I really am." Across town, as Emily tucked Lily in that evening, she too felt a sense of finality. She was no longer haunted by the what-ifs of her past. Instead, she was grounded in her present, focused on building a loving and supportive future for herself and her daughter. Both Jake and Emily had found peace in their own ways, their stories intertwined yet independent. Each had learned to forgive, to let go, and to grow beyond the pain of their shared history. And as they moved forward, they carried with them the strength they had gained from every challenge, every heartbreak, and every new beginning. If you enjoyed this story of love, resilience, and new beginnings, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and join us for more stories that explore the beauty and challenges of life. We share tales that will touch your heart, inspire you, and remind you that every ending is just the start of a new beginning. Thanks for watching, and we can't wait to bring you more stories.